Welcome everyone to the BL Blitz 2024. We have Praggnanandhaa taking on the top Armenian GM Haik Martirosyan. D4, knight f6, c4, e6. Knight comes out. Pragg thinks for a bit and puts his knight on c6. Not a very common move, but Haik goes g3 and Pragg immediately transposes it into his favorite opening, the Bogo Indian. He loves to play it. Queen e7. And now knight comes out to c3, strikes in the center. You can take the pawn, but instead Haik decides to sacrifice his pawn on c4. Knight jumps into the center. Look at the speed at which Praggnanandhaa is making his moves. He's well prepared. This pawn is hanging. You can go queen d4, but you can also play f4 and defend the pawn. He plays it. He pushes his pawn to f4. Black castles. And now Haik is a pawn down for the time being, but he can go after the pawn with queen d4, or he can just say, I want to continue normally and castles. He chooses the latter, he castles it out, and Pragg is again ready with his move, rook b8. His plan is b5. This time, if you play queen d4, trying to attack a7 and c4, knight b6 saves everything. So he goes rook b8, rook d1. And Pragg now thinks a bit and pushes his pawn to b5 and says to Haik, thank you so much for the pawn. a4. Now very important for Pragg to find knight c5, because if b5 pawn is taken, there's a fork on d2 and a1. He pauses there, which is a good thing, because now maybe he can find this move. Knight c5 is really a very, very powerful blow here. Would Pragg be able to find? Just look at this. If knight c5, if you take here, knight b3, and this is winning for black. Pragg down to 2 minutes 27 seconds, which is good that he's thinking, but he plays a6, and Haik very quickly takes back. But that was a definite miss there by Pragg. He could have gotten the advantage out of the opening, but now his position looks slightly passive. Although he's a pawn up, the bishop on c8 cannot be easily developed because the knight is hanging here. Let's see what Haik decides to play in this position. There are also these check ideas which you should be careful about. For example, if you play bishop c6, then there is queen c5 check. He goes rook a7. And the point here is that if queen c5 check, you have queen d4, and after take, there is quite some pressure. So Pragg goes knight c5, and he tells Haik that, look, my rook defends this pawn, my queen defends this pawn, the knight is well placed. Yes, I still have problems with my bishop, but I'll figure it out. Queen e3 played. Essentially, it's about white having one pawn deficit but playing against this passive bishop. So a clash of ideologies there. Haik has 1 minute 45 seconds. Praggnanandhaa has 2 minutes on the clock, and Pragg has to find a way to continue. You may want to figure this out. Like, for example, you may want to play bishop d7, but then your c7 pawn is hanging, so you can't do that. You may want to play bishop b7, but then knight takes b5 has to be considered, as after bishop g2 there is rook c7, and suddenly c5 is a bit soft, and then you can take it. So there are all these kind of issues that Pragg is facing here, and especially in a blitz game, these are not easy ones to solve. So he's thinking between perhaps putting his knight on b3 and pushing with b4. I think b4 makes a lot of sense, and he plays it. Knight e4, and Pragg instantly takes it. Maybe a better idea was to play on knight here, but taking bishop e4, and now you can feel it. White's pieces are just so much more active, and also time wise, Pragg is down to a minute while Haik has 1 minute 46 seconds. Rook b5 played. Now this rook is undefended. Very careful when the pawn will push forward. Suddenly bishop h7, king h7, queen d3 ideas, winning the rook would become very strong. I think Haik can now just attack this pawn on c4. Yes, he plays it. Pragg can trade queens, but after takes rook a4, this is hanging. It's difficult to defend it. Then c4 would be weak. So Pragg cannot really easily play queen c5, but maybe it's the best way to sort of get out of this mess that he is in right now. And he's already down to 45 seconds, so the pressure is mounting. Haik Martirosyan really putting a lot of pressure on Pragg. And you can see Pragg is uncomfortable. He's swiveling the pawn, then puts it away, then takes it back. Blunder here. Oh, he takes it instantly. But again, bishop at 7 should be found here. Check, and you win the rook. Will he find it? Haik after b3. He thinks for a bit. He needs to see it. It's not so difficult. Because also, after takes queen d3 and taking here, he controls the c5 square, so there are no checks and losing the rook. No, he doesn't. He plays c4. Pragg is back in the game. Rook b8. And the b3 pawn can be dangerous, so he attacks it. But now Pragg can move in with his queen. Queen b4. Yes, he plays it with 30 seconds on the clock. Haik has a minute. He takes the pawn on c7. Pragg quickly gets his bishop out. Finally, the bishop is breathing, but now white, instead of being a pawn down, is a pawn up. Bishop comes back to d3. b2 played. f5. The pawn is pushed forward. And now, well, if you take here, there is e6 coming in. And Praggnanandhaa takes pawn to e6 and blunders with queen c3. He had to go back queen d6 here, which would have saved everything, and the position was equal. Why is this a blunder? Because loose pieces drop off. The bishop on a6 is loose. Takes, and how do you now win? Check here, and the bishop is hanging. The rook is also attacked. Everything is loose. He takes the bishop. There is queen c1 check, but there is king g2. He gives a check. King moves up. Rook a7, but this is not at all good. Queen b5, and Pragg is a piece down, and he resigns, shaking his head. Haik Martirosyan played it well. He showed his compensation. Pragg was unable to prove that his extra pawn was useful, but very interesting theoretical battle in this line of the Bogo Indian.